Trump isn't happy because today a federal judge appointed by President Trump ordered the release of grand jury records in the case of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, a decision that, well, it just upends much of the handle that the Trump administration has tried to keep on this scandal. In the simplest terms, a Florida federal judge agreed the Justice Department may unseal grand jury transcripts tied to the disgraced financier and convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, and the court ruled a new federal transparency law overrides the decades-old secrecy protections that normally keep grand jury material locked away, U.S. District Judge Rodney Smith held that the Epstein Files Transparency Act of 2025 supersedes the confidentiality rules that govern federal grand juries under Rule 6. And because of the way the law is written, it's the later enacted, more specific mandate, and it wins. Oh, that's got to hurt. Because while the president was being showered with made-up trophies to appease his ego like one would a toddler, the legal system was doing something you can't PR your way out of. This is your peace prize. There is also a beautiful medal for you that you can wear everywhere you want to go. I'm going to wear right now. Okay, let me hold. Ah, fantastic. Excellent. And then while that theater's happening, U.S. District Judge Rodney Smith, a federal judge in Florida, granted the Justice Department's request to publicly release grand jury records related to the criminal prosecutions of Epstein and his longtime ally and co-conspirator, Ghislaine Maxwell. Smith, an appointee of President Donald Trump, did I say that already? Yeah, I think it's worth noting twice, wrote in a brief order that the new law requiring DOJ to disclose nearly all of the investigative records into Epstein and Maxwell overrides the standard regulations prohibiting public release of grand jury material. Now, I want you to feel the timeline here, because the timeline is the pressure. In Florida, grand juries were convened back in 2005 and 2007 to investigate Epstein. He ultimately evaded federal charges at the time through a deal with prosecutors that allowed him to plead guilty to state prostitution charges. Then years later, in 2019, he was arrested on federal sex trafficking charges in New York, and he died in custody that same year, and his death was ruled a suicide. Maxwell was later convicted in 2021 for her role and is serving a 20-year sentence. And what Judge Smith ordered unsealed now is the Florida grand jury transcript material from that mid-2000s investigation with redactions for victims and personal identifying information. And it matters that this did not happen in a vacuum. Earlier this year, the Justice Department tried to unseal grand jury transcripts in Florida and New York amid a public uproar that the Trump administration was not being transparent enough. Judges rejected those initial bids because federal rules generally keep grand jury proceedings secret except in narrow circumstances. Smith himself and other judges said, basically, public interest alone is not enough. DOJ didn't appeal those denials. Then Congress passed a new law. Trump signed it on the 19th of November, 2025, and DOJ came back and tried again. This time, Judge Smith said, the new act changes the analysis and it authorizes disclosure notwithstanding the usual secrecy rule. So let's talk about the law, because the law is the lever. This is not vague. It's H 4405, the Epstein Files Transparency Act, and it became Public Law 11938 on the 19th of November, 2025. Congress.gov summary spells it out. DOJ must publish in a searchable and downloadable format all unclassified records, documents, communications, and investigative materials in DOJ's possession that relate to the investigation and prosecution of Jeffrey Epstein. That includes materials relating to Ghislaine Maxwell, flight logs and travel records, and individuals named or referenced, including government officials, in connection with the investigation and prosecution. DOJ can withhold certain information like victims' personal information and materials that would jeopardize an active federal investigation. And within 15 days after publication, DOJ must report to Congress what categories were released, what was withheld, summarize redactions, and provide a list of government officials and politically exposed individuals named or referenced. That is an unusually direct transparency mandate. Also, the vote is not subtle. The bill passed the House 427-1 and passed the Senate without amendment by unanimous consent and was signed the same day it was presented. So when people say this is just politics, the answer is yes, but it's also procedure. And procedure is the part that does not care about your talking points. Now, Smith's order will only further expand the already enormous pile of Epstein-related documents expected to be made public in the coming weeks, because the law gave DOJ roughly 30 days from signing, which points straight to around the 19th of December 2025 as the deadline window everyone is watching. Similar requests have been made in New York, but judges have not ruled there yet, at least not as of the reporting we're looking at. And even the reporters covering this are warning the unsealing might not yield much genuinely new information because so much has leaked or been litigated or surfaced through civil suits and prior releases. Still, it's a front door opening, and psychologically, that changes everything. Now, why does this matter, right? Well, number one, for months, the Trump administration has tried to steer the narrative regarding Epstein. Earlier this year, the DOJ issued what the segment describes as a ridiculous memo concluding there was no credible evidence that Epstein had a client list of powerful people or blackmailed them, and claiming no further charges were warranted. And then in the clip you provided, there's this tense exchange where someone says, according to victims who cooperated with the FBI, documents detail at least 20 men, including Jess Staley, former CEO of Barclays, and at least 19 other individuals described as a Hollywood producer worth a few $100 million, a royal prince, a high-profile individual in the music industry, a very prominent banker, a high-profile government official, a high-profile former politician, an owner of a car company in Italy, a rock star, a magician, and at least 6 billionaires, including a billionaire from Canada. I'm repeating this the way it appears in the original narration because you told me not to omit any detail, but I also want to be clear about something. Lists like that are often exactly why grand jury secrecy exists, because accusations can destroy innocent people if they're not actually charged. That said, the act itself explicitly says reputation protection isn't a basis to withhold records, and that is part of why this fight has become so explosive. Meanwhile, Trump has publicly referred to investigations and demands for files as a Democratic hoax, a partisan smear job orchestrated by people like Obama. And Reuters notes that he opposed release of the files, then reversed course shortly before lawmakers voted and signed the bill on November 19. That reversal matters because it tells you this was not voluntary transparency. This was a dam about to burst and someone trying to position themselves in front of it before it breaks. And that brings us to the politics inside the Republican Party, because the story isn't just Democrats want files. The story is Trump's own base wanted this, and the pressure came from inside the coalition that usually protects him. There was a discharge petition dynamic in the House that forced action over leadership resistance, and Speaker Mike Johnson publicly criticized attempts to force votes, calling them reckless and arguing they could harm innocent people and potentially expose victims, while the pressure kept building anyway. Now, let's talk about the Mike Johnson sequence exactly as your original text lays it out, because it captures the humiliation factor Donald Trump's dictatorial power over Congress will not continue. Hello, I'm delighted to assist you with our voice services. Choose a voice that resonates with you, and let's begin our creative audio journey together. He says he is deeply disappointed, claims he was told Chuck Schumer rushed it to the floor, says it needed amendments, says he spoke to the president, asked if Trump may veto it. He doesn't say. Asked if Trump is supportive, says they both have concerns. And yet the bill still passes and the president signs it. Not to mention his efforts to sway votes on the House floor by holding war room type meetings with the likes of Lauren Boebert, who went ahead and voted yes on releasing the files anyway. And this part is not just narration. It was widely reported. Multiple sources told ABC News that top administration officials met with Rep. Lauren Boebert about the effort to force a House vote and attempted to get her to remove her name from the petition. Similar reporting describes a last-minute push from Trump meetings at the White House and Boebert keeping her name on. So when the segment asks, why is the White House working so hard to keep information from being released, it's not a rhetorical question pulled from thin air. The meetings happened, the pressure campaign happened, and then you've got the Situation Room imagery in your original text. The White House yesterday held a meeting at the Situation Room with some of the highest officials in the country, with members of your own party, to try to get them to vote against the discharge petition. Again, the specific room and the specific cast can vary depending on the reporting, but the core point stands. The administration acted like this was an emergency when transparency should be routine. And when you behave like transparency is an emergency, people assume there's something underneath you're afraid of. Now, here's where I'm going to bring in a systems point, because I've spent my whole career watching complex systems fail. Sometimes they fail because someone is evil, but more often they fail because incentives are misaligned, information is withheld, and the feedback loops are corrupted. Grand juries are a part of our justice system that is intentionally opaque. They meet in secret, they hear evidence, they decide whether the government meets the threshold to bring charges. The secrecy exists to protect people who are investigated but not charged, to keep witnesses safe, to preserve the integrity of ongoing investigations. But here's the tension. When a case becomes a national obsession, secrecy that is normally a protection starts to look like a shield for the powerful. That's what happened here. And that's why Congress passed a law that essentially says, we're done with trust us, publish the unclassified material, redact victims, protect ongoing investigations, but don't hide the rest. And then, crucially, tell Congress what you released, what you withheld, and list the government officials and politically exposed individuals referenced. When you put that in statute, you're not asking politely, you are forcing institutional compliance. Now, I want to include the other thread from your original script that might feel like it came out of nowhere, but actually connects perfectly to this trust question. And so gaslighting the people and trying to tell them that prices have come down is not helping. It's actually infuriating people, because people know what they're paying at the grocery store. They know what they're paying for their kids' clothes and school supplies. They know what they're paying for their electricity bills. And so that approach does not work. We need compassion and show that we care about the American people, and show that we are in the trenches with them on what they're going through. That's first and foremost. You don't gaslight them, you don't lecture them, and you don't deny what's happening. That's in your original text, and it might sound like a separate speech, but it's the same lesson. When people can see reality with their own eyes, denial destroys credibility. And Reuters and Ipsos polling this year captures why this is such a raw nerve. Reuters reported Trump's approval fell to 38%, the lowest of his term, with public dissatisfaction about rising living costs and about how he handled the Epstein files. That poll said only about 20% approved of his handling of Epstein-related files, and the cost of living pressure was a major driver of broader dissatisfaction. So when people feel squeezed on prices and then they see secrecy and spin on a scandal like this, it becomes a multiplier. And this is not just a niche obsession. A PBS News NPR Marist poll found about 3/4 of Americans supported releasing all files related to the Epstein case with victims' names redacted. That kind of number crosses party lines. It tells you that people aren't asking for gossip, they're asking for accountability and closure, and they don't trust that they're getting it. Now, the segment also includes this email fragment, and I'm going to restate it carefully and exactly because you told me to keep every detail. But Jeffrey Epstein, according to this email that we reviewed, emails Ghislaine Maxwell and says, I want you to realize that that dog that hasn't barked is Trump. There's a name that's redacted, which the committee says is a victim of Jeffrey Epstein's. And that redacted spent hours at my house with him. He has never once been mentioned, police chief, etc. I'm 75% there. Now, Ghislaine Maxwell responds to that email and says, I have been thinking about that. We don't get any more context to this email or what exactly Jeffrey Epstein is alleging there. That is exactly why transparency fights become infernos, because the public sees fragments, hears rumors, and fills the gaps with their worst assumptions. And here's the new reporting that adds fuel. Congress has separately been releasing information it received through its own work into the federal government's handling of Epstein's case. CBS reported that Congress has made public a trove of emails and messages obtained from Epstein's estate, along with photos and videos of his private island in the Caribbean, and that Democrats on a House Oversight Committee said they also received financial records related to Epstein from JP Morgan Chase and Deutsche Bank, which they plan to make public. So when people talk about a flood of documents, they're not just talking about DOJ. They're talking about multiple pipelines all opening at once. Now, look at the optics, because politics is visual. Even if the Florida grand jury transcripts don't contain the Hollywood scene, people imagine the optics are already stuck. The administration spent months trying to keep a lid on this, trying to steer the narrative. Then Congress passes a law ordering release of unclassified material. DOJ renews motions to unseal, and a Trump-appointed judge grants it. That sequence creates a simple public story. If nothing mattered, you wouldn't fight this hard. If it was a hoax, you wouldn't need meetings and pressure campaigns. If it was all harmless, you wouldn't need to manage it like a crisis. And the irony, the thing that makes this feel like an engineered backfire, is that the order comes from within Trump's own judicial legacy. Judge Rodney Smith is not described in the mainstream reporting as a liberal activist. He is a federal judge in Florida, and his order is basically the law is the law. Congress enacted a specific mandate. It overrides the general secrecy prohibition, and DOJ can proceed subject to redactions. That's not ideology. That is statutory interpretation. It's the kind of thing that makes people realize the system is not fully controllable, even by someone who tries. Now, I want to talk about what you should expect from grand jury transcripts, because I don't want anyone to be disappointed or misled. Grand jury transcripts can be messy. They can be repetitive. Witnesses can contradict each other. Prosecutors can ask leading questions. Some material can be sealed for legitimate reasons. Victim information will be redacted, and it should be. Names of people never charged might still appear, and that raises real fairness questions. And it's why Speaker Johnson and others argued disclosure could harm innocent reputations. That concern is not imaginary. But here's the counterpoint. When a government loses trust, secrecy becomes more damaging than disclosure. That's why this law is written to force publication in a searchable, downloadable format and to require transparency about what is withheld. That is basically Congress saying you can redact, but you cannot hide the fact of redaction. You can withhold for active investigations, but you must tell us categories and give a list of politically exposed individuals named or referenced. That is the legislative branch hardening the system against quiet suppression. Now, the script you gave also says, even if these transcripts don't uncover anything new, the optics right now are stuck. The administration's previous denials now risk looking like further efforts to cover up or at least try to bury some uncomfortable truths. That's exactly right, because once you see the White House leaning on members, once you see the panic around discharge petition, once you hear the president calling it a hoax, then signing the law anyway, you can't unring that bell. And then we get to the polling line in your original text, and I'm going to preserve it exactly in spirit while being careful about attribution. They're all in red. They're all in the negative territory. But on immigration, he's 5 points underwater. For foreign policy, 8 points. Trade and tariffs, he's 17 points. The economy, 18 points. But look at the Epstein case. He is 39 points below water on the Epstein case. His net approval is 39 points in the negative. My goodness gracious. Those exact numbers may reflect a specific poll cited in the segment, but the general direction is supported by Reuters reporting. Public approval of Trump's handling of the Epstein files has been extremely low, and it is weighed on his overall standing alongside cost of living concerns. So here's where I land, and I want you to hear it as plainly as possible. A Trump-appointed federal judge in Florida just cleared DOJ to unseal grand jury transcripts from the mid-2000s Florida Epstein investigation because Congress passed and Trump signed a law that mandates disclosure of unclassified Epstein and Maxwell investigative records with a deadline window around the 19th of December 2025. This is not rumor. This is not vibes. This is statutory mandate plus a court order. The system moved, and the reason this is the order Trump feared is not that it guarantees some shocking revelation. It's that it removes control. It removes the ability to say, trust me, while withholding the underlying record. It removes the ability of leadership to bottle up votes. It turns whispers into documents you can search. It turns fragments into context. And it forces the people who have been managing the narrative to now manage disclosure. So I'm asking you to do two things. First, keep your eyes open for the releases, the redactions, and the follow-up report to Congress that the law requires. Don't just watch for the headlines. Watch for what is withheld and why. Second, tell me what you think. Do you believe these grand jury transcripts will actually change anyone's mind, or do you think the fight is already the story? The fight itself proves how afraid they were of sunlight. Sarah Seidner, loved this video. Support independent media and unlock exclusive content, ad-free videos, and custom emojis by becoming a paid member of our YouTube channel today. You can also gift memberships to others. Let's keep growing together. And if you want more updates like this, hit subscribe right now, share this video, and drop your take in the comments.